Chapter 5 of Green Mansions. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. Green Mansions by W. H. Hudson. Chapter 5. After making a hasty meal at the house, I started, full of pleasing anticipations, for the wood, for how pleasant a place it was to be in. What a wild beauty and fragrance and melodiousness it possessed above all forest, because of that mystery that drew me to it. And it was mine, truly and absolutely, as much mine as any portion of earth's surface could belong to any man. Mine with all its products, the precious woods and fruits and fragrant gums that would never be trafficked away, its wild animals that man would never persecute, nor would any jealous savage dispute my ownership or pretend that it was part of his hunting ground. As I crossed the savannah I played with this fancy, but when I reached the ridgy eminence to look down once more on my new domain, the fancy changed to a feeling so keen that it pierced to my heart and was like pain in its intensity, causing tears to rush to my eyes. And caring not in that solitude to disguise my feelings from myself, and from the wide heaven that looked down and saw me, for this is the sweetest thing that solitude has for us, that we are free in it, and no convention holds us, I dropped on my knees and kissed the stony ground. Then, casting up my eyes, thanked the author of my being for the gift of that wild forest, those green mansions, where I had found so great a happiness. Elated with this strain of feeling, I reached the wood not long after noon, but no melodious voice gave me familiar and expected welcome, nor did my invisible companion make itself heard at all on that day, or, at all events, not in its usual bird-like warbling language. But on this day I met with a curious little adventure, and heard something very extraordinary, very mysterious, which I could not avoid connecting in my mind with the unseen warbler that so often followed me in my rambles. It was an exceedingly bright day, without cloud, but windy, and finding myself in a rather open part of the wood, near its border, where the breeze could be felt, I sat down to rest on the lower part of a large branch, which was half broken, but still remained attached to the trunk of the tree, while resting its terminal twigs on the ground. Just before me, where I sat, grew a low, wide-spreading plant, covered with broad, round, polished leaves, and the roundness, stiffness, and perfectly horizontal position of the upper leaves made them look like a collection of small platforms or round table-tops, placed nearly on a level. Through the leaves, to the height of a foot or more above them, a slender dead stem protruded, and from a twig at its summit depended a broken spider's web. A minute dead leaf had become attached to one of those loose threads, and threw its small but distinct shadow on the platform leaves below, and as it trembled and swayed in the current of air, the black spot trembled with it, or flew swiftly over the bright green surfaces, and was seldom at rest. Now, as I sat looking down on the leaves and the small dancing shadow, scarcely thinking of what I was looking at, I noticed a small spider, with a flat body and short legs, creep cautiously out on to the upper surface of a leaf. Its pale red color, barred with velvet black, first drew my attention to it, for it was beautiful to the eye, and presently I discovered that this was no web-spinning, sedentary spider, but a wandering hunter that captured its prey, like a cat, by stealing on it concealed, and making a rush or spring at the last. The moving shadow had attracted it, and, as the sequel showed, was mistaken for a fly running about over the leaves and flitting from leaf to leaf. Now began a series of wonderful maneuvers on the spider's part, with the object of circumventing the imaginary fly, which seemed specially designed to meet this special case, for certainly no insect had ever before behaved in quite so erratic a manner. Each time the shadow flew past, the spider ran swiftly in the same direction, hiding itself under the leaves, always trying to get near without alarming its prey, and then the shadow would go round and round in a small circle, and some new strategic move on the part of the hunter would be called forth. I became deeply interested in this curious scene, I began to wish that the shadow would remain quiet for a moment or two, so as to give the hunter a chance. And at last I had my wish. The shadow was almost motionless, and the spider moving towards it, yet seeming not to move. And as it crept closer, I fancied that I could almost see the little striped body quivering with excitement. Then came the final scene. Swift and straight as an arrow, the hunter shot himself on to the fly-like shadow, then wiggled round and round, evidently trying to take hold of his prey with fangs and claws, and finding nothing under him, he raised the forepart of his body vertically, as if to stare about him in search of the elusive fly, but the action may have simply expressed astonishment. At this moment I was just on the point of giving free and loud vent to the laughter which I had been holding in when, just behind me, as if from some person who had been watching the scene over my shoulder, and was as much amused as myself at its termination, sounded a clear trill of merry laughter. I started up and looked hastily around, but no living creature was there. The mass of loose foliage I stared into was agitated, as if from a body having just pushed through it. In a moment the leaves and fronds were motionless again. Still, I could not be sure that a slight gust of wind had not shaken them. But I was so convinced that I had heard close to me a real human laugh, or sound of some living creature that exactly simulated a laugh, that I carefully searched the ground about me, expecting to find a being of some kind. But I found nothing, and going back to my seat on the hanging branch, I remained seated for a considerable time, at first only listening, then pondering on the mystery of that sweet trill of laughter. And finally I began to wonder whether I, like the spider that chased the shadow, had been deluded and had seemed to hear a sound that was not a sound. On the following day I was in the wood again, and after a 2 or 3 hours' ramble, during which I heard nothing, thinking it useless to haunt the known spots any longer, I turned southwards and penetrated into a denser part of the forest, where the undergrowth made progress difficult. I was not afraid of losing myself. The sun above and my sense of direction, which was always good, would enable me to return to the starting point. In this direction I had been pushing resolutely on for over half an hour, finding it no easy matter to make my way without constantly deviating to this side or that from the course I wished to keep, when I came to a much more open spot. The trees were smaller and scantier here, owing to the rocky nature of the ground, which sloped rather rapidly down, but it was moist and overgrown with mosses, ferns, creepers, and low shrubs, all of the liveliest green. I could not see many yards ahead owing to the bushes and tall fern fronds, but presently I began to hear a low, continuous sound, which, when I advanced 20 or 30 yards further, I made out to be the gurgling of running water. And at the same moment I made the discovery that my throat was parched and my palms tingling with heat. I hurried on, promising myself a cool draught, when all at once, above the soft dashing and gurgling of the water, I caught yet another sound, a low warbling note, or succession of notes, which might have been emitted by a bird. But it startled me nevertheless. Bird-like warbling sounds had come to mean so much to me, and pausing, I listened intently. It was not repeated, and finally, treading with the utmost caution so as not to alarm the mysterious vocalist, I crept on until, coming to a greenheart with a quantity of feathery foliage of a shrub growing about its roots, I saw that just beyond the tree the ground was more open still, letting in the sunlight from above, and that the channel of the stream I sought was in this open space about 20 yards from me, although the water was still hidden from sight. Something else was there, which I did see. Instantly my cautious advance was arrested. I stood gazing with concentrated vision, scarcely daring to breathe, lest I should scare it away. It was a human being, a girl form, reclining on the moss among the ferns and herbage near the roots of a small tree. One arm was doubled behind her neck for her head to rest upon, while the other arm was held extended before her, the hand raised towards a small brown bird perched on a pendulous twig just beyond its reach. She appeared to be playing with the bird, possibly amusing herself by trying to entice it onto her hand, and the hand appeared to tempt it greatly, for it persistently hopped up and down, turning rapidly about this way and that, flirting its wings and tail, and always appearing just on the point of dropping onto her finger. From my position it was impossible to see her distinctly, yet I dared not move. I could make out that she was small, not above 4 feet 6 or 7 inches in height, in figure slim, with delicately shaped little hands and feet. Her feet were bare, and her only garment was a slight chemise-shaped dress reaching below her knees, of a whitish-grey color, with a faint luster as of a silky material. Her hair was very wonderful. It was loose and abundant, and seemed wavy or curly, falling in a cloud on her shoulders and arms. Dark it appeared, but the precise tint was indeterminable, as was that of her skin, which looked neither brown nor white. Altogether, near to me as she actually was, there was a kind of mistiness in the figure which made it appear somewhat vague and distant, and a greenish-grey seemed the prevailing color. This tint I presently attributed to the effect of the sunlight falling on her through the green foliage, for once, for a moment, she raised herself to reach her finger nearer to the bird, and then a gleam of unsubdued sunlight fell on her hair and arm, and the arm at that moment appeared of a pearly whiteness, and the hair, just where the light touched it, had a strange luster and play of iridescent color. I had not been watching her more than 3 seconds before the bird, with a sharp, creaking little chirp, flew up and away in sudden alarm. At the same moment she turned and saw me through the light leafy screen. But although catching sight of me thus suddenly, she did not exhibit alarm like the bird, only her eyes, wide open, with a surprised look in them, remained immovably fixed on my face. And then slowly, imperceptibly, for I did not notice the actual movement, so gradual and smooth it was, like the motion of a cloud of mist which changes its form and place, yet to the eye seems not to have moved. She rose to her knees, to her feet, retired, and with face still towards me, and eyes fixed on mine, finally disappeared, going as if she had melted away into the verdure. The leafage was there occupying the precise spot where she had been a moment before, the feathery foliage of an acacia shrub, and stems and broad arrow-shaped leaves of an aquatic plant, and slim, drooping fern fronds, and they were motionless, and seemed not to have been touched by something passing through them. She had gone, yet I continued still, bent almost double, gazing fixedly at the spot where I had last seen her, my mind in a strange condition, possessed by sensations which were keenly felt and yet contradictory. So vivid was the image left on my brain that she still seemed to be actually before my eyes, and she was not there, nor had been, for it was a dream, an illusion, and no such being existed, or could exist, in this gross world, and at the same time I knew that she had been there, that imagination was powerless to conjure up a form so exquisite. With the mental image I had to be satisfied, for although I remained for some hours at that spot, I saw her no more, nor did I hear any familiar melodious sound. For I was now convinced that in this wild solitary girl I had at length discovered the mysterious warbler that so often followed me in the wood. At length, seeing that it was growing late, I took a drink from the stream, and slowly and reluctantly made my way out of the forest, and went home. Early next day I was back in the wood full of delightful anticipations, and had no sooner got well among the trees than a soft warbling sound reached my ears. It was like that heard on the previous day just before catching sight of the girl among the ferns. So soon, thought I, elated, and with cautious steps I proceeded to explore the ground, hoping again to catch her unawares. But I saw nothing, and only after beginning to doubt that I had heard anything unusual, and had sat down to rest on a rock, the sound was repeated, soft and low as before, very near and distinct. Nothing more was heard at this spot, but an hour later, in another place, the same mysterious note sounded near me. During my remaining time in the forest I was served many times in the same way, and still nothing was seen, nor was there any change in the voice. Only when the day was near its end did I give up my quest, feeling very keenly disappointed. It then struck me that the cause of the elusive creature's behavior was that she had been piqued at my discovery of her in one of her most secret hiding places in the heart of the wood, and that it had pleased her to play me out in this manner. On the next day there was no change. She was there again, evidently following me, but always invisible, and varied not from that one mocking note of yesterday, which seemed to challenge me to find her a second time. In the end I was vexed, and resolved to be even with her by not visiting the wood for some time. A display of indifference on my part would, I hoped, result in making her less coy in the future. Next day, firm in my new resolution, I accompanied Kuako and 2 others to a distant spot, where they expected that the ripening fruit on a cashew tree would attract a large number of birds. The fruit, however, proved still green, so that we gathered none and killed few birds. Returning together, Kuako kept at my side, and by, falling behind our companions, he complimented me on my good shooting, although, as usual, I had only wasted the arrows I had blown. "Soon you will be able to hit," he said. "Hit a bird as big as a small woman," and he laughed once more immoderately at the old joke. At last, growing confidential, he said that I would soon possess a zabatana of my own, with arrows in plenty. He was going to make the arrows himself, and his uncle Otawinki, who had a straight eye, would make the tube. I treated it all as a joke, but he solemnly assured me that he meant it. Next morning he asked me if I was going to the forest of evil fame, and when I replied in the negative, seemed surprised, and, very much to my surprise, evidently disappointed. He even tried to persuade me to go, where before I had been earnestly recommended not to go, until, finding that I would not, he took me with him to hunt in the woods. By and by he returned to the same subject. He could not understand why I would not go to that wood, and asked me if I had begun to grow afraid. "No, not afraid," I replied, "but I know the place well, and am getting tired of it." I had seen everything in it, birds and beasts, and had heard all its strange noises. "Yes, heard," he said, nodding his head knowingly, "but you have seen nothing strange. Your eyes are not good enough yet." I laughed contemptuously, and answered that I had seen everything strange the wood contained, including a strange young girl, and I went on to describe her appearance, and finished by asking if he thought a white man was frightened at the sight of a young girl. What I said astonished him. Then he seemed greatly pleased, and growing still more confidential and generous than on the previous day, he said that I would soon be a most important personage among them, and greatly distinguish myself. He did not like it when I laughed at all this, and went on with great seriousness to speak of the unmade blowpipe that would be mine, speaking of it as if it had been something very great, equal to the gift of a large tract of land, or the governorship of a province north of the Orinoco. And by he spoke of something else more wonderful even than the promise of a blowpipe, with arrows galore, and this was that young sister of his, whose name was Ualava, a maid of about 16, shy and silent and mild-eyed, rather lean and dirty, not ugly, nor yet prepossessing. And this copper-colored little drab of the wilderness he proposed to bestow in marriage on me. Anxious to pump him, I managed to control my muscles and ask him what authority he, a young nobody, who had not yet risen to the dignity of buying a wife for himself, could have to dispose of his sister in this off-hand way. He replied that there would be no difficulty, that Rooney would give his consent, as would Otawinki, Piaki, and other relations, and last and least, according to the matrimonial customs of these latitudes, Ualava herself would be ready to bestow her person. Ku, worn fig-leaf-wise, necklace of akuri teeth and all, on so worthy a suitor as myself. Finally, to make the prospect still more inviting, he added that it would not be necessary for me to subject myself to any voluntary tortures to prove myself a man, and fitted to enter into the purgatorial state of matrimony. He was a great deal too considerate, I said, and with all the gravity I could command, asked him what kind of torture he would recommend. For me, so valorous a person, no torture, he answered magnanimously. But he, Kuako, had made up his mind as to the form of torture he meant to inflict some day on his own person. He would prepare a large sack, and into it put fire ants. "As many as that!" he exclaimed triumphantly, stooping and filling his 2 hands with loose sand. He would put them in the sack, and then get into it himself, naked, and tie it tightly round his neck, so as to show to all spectators that the hellish pain of innumerable venomous stings in his flesh could be endured without a groan, and with an unmoved countenance. The poor youth had not an original mind, since this was one of the commonest forms of self-torture among the Guyana tribes. But the sudden wonderful animation with which he spoke of it, the fiendish joy that illumined his usually stolid countenance, sent a sudden disgust and horror through me. But what a strange inverted kind of fiendishness is this, which delights at the anticipation of torture inflicted on oneself and not on an enemy? And towards others these savages are mild and peaceable. No, I could not believe in their mildness. That was only on the surface, where nothing occurred to rouse their savage, cruel instincts. I could have laughed at the whole matter, but the exulting look on my companion's face had made me sick of the subject, and I wished not to talk any more about it. But he would talk still, this fellow whose words, as a rule, I had to take out of his mouth with a fork, as we say, and still on the same subject, he said that not one person in the village would expect to see me torture myself, that after what I would do for them all, after delivering them from a great evil, nothing further would be expected of me. I asked him to explain his meaning, for it now began to appear plain that in everything he had said he had been leading up to some very important matter. It would, of course, have been a great mistake to suppose that my savage was offering me a blowpipe and a marketable virgin sister from purely disinterested motives. In reply, he went back to that still unforgotten joke about my being able eventually to hit a bird as big as a small woman with an arrow. Out of it all came, when he went on to ask me if that mysterious girl I had seen in the wood was not of a size to suit me as a target when I had got my hand in with a little more practice. That was the great work I was asked to do for them. That shy, mysterious girl, with the melodious wild bird voice, was the evil being I was asked to slay with poisoned arrows. This was why he now wished me to go often to the wood, to become more and more familiar with her haunts and habits, to overcome all shyness and suspicion in her, and at the proper moment, when it would be impossible to miss my mark, to plant the fatal arrow. The disgust he had inspired in me before, when gloating over anticipated tortures, was a weak and transient feeling to what I now experienced. I turned on him in a sudden transport of rage, and in a moment would have shattered on his head the blowpipe I was carrying in my hand, but his astonished look as he turned to face me made me pause, and prevented me from committing so fatal an indiscretion. I could only grind my teeth, and struggle to overcome an almost overpowering hatred and wrath. Finally I flung the tube down, and bade him take it, telling him that I would not touch it again if he offered me all the sisters of all the savages in Guyana for wives. He continued gazing at me, mute with astonishment, and prudence suggested that it would be best to conceal as far as possible the violent animosity I had conceived against him. I asked him somewhat scornfully if he believed that I should ever be able to hit anything, bird or human being, with an arrow. "No!" I almost shouted, so as to give vent to my feelings in some way, and drawing my revolver, "This is the white man's weapon, but he kills men with it, men who attempt to kill or injure him, but neither with this nor any other weapon does he murder innocent young girls treacherously." After that we went on in silence for some time. At length he said that the being I had seen in the wood and was not afraid of was no innocent young girl, but a daughter of the Didi, an evil being, and that so long as she continued to inhabit the wood, they could not go there to hunt, and even in other woods they constantly went in fear of meeting her. Too much disgusted to talk with him, I went on in silence, and when we reached the stream near the village, I threw off my clothes and plunged into the water to cool my anger before going in to the others. End of chapter.